have with us from the Voice and Viewpoint our managing editor, Miss Latanya West. She's the brain thrust behind all the great stuff that you read and allowed me to sign my name to, so we feel good about that. But our very special guest is our mayor, the Honorable Todd Gloria, mayor of the city of San Diego. And we invited him here this evening to have kind of an open mic discussion. And so we want to hear from him from some things that are happening with the city, primarily concerned about people understanding the relationship between the city and the county. A lot of people still don't know what strong mayor form of government really means, because when they switched, they deliberately didn't tell folks what the difference was. So they're still kind of learning as they go. And we have a budget that we are concerned about, and housing, and just a number of things. And so we want to let the mayor have an opportunity to talk with us. I believe that if you have a question, you can send it in godradio1.com. We're not going to take live calls because we want to maximize this time that we have with Mayor Gloria. And so with that being said, Mayor Gloria, welcome to From the Desk of the Editor.
Dr. Warren, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. And so we would like to just throw this whole thing open. One of the biggest concerns that I see is that most people do not understand the relationship between the city and the county. And with the exception of Dr. Thompson, worried about paying for trash.
He was getting his lobbying in before we went on air, just for your listeners to know. Yes.
Yeah, okay. Because in all my years of living in the county and with business, I've had to pay for trash ever since I've been here. But, you know, he's concerned, so we try to walk him through it. So we want to, Dr. Thompson, did you have any opening comments before?
No, I'm excited having the fellow Warhawk, Madison Warhawk, in the house. And so this definitely glad to have you, Mayor Gloria. So we're going to make sure we maximize our time today. And we got a lot of questions. Trash is not a big issue. I'm going to go ahead and pay my trash. I'm just trying to get some meter money now.
We can talk about that.
Okay. And so, Tanya, I know you have you'll have questions or issues as we go. So this is just an open, free flow. This is different from most media things because we're just here to talk and enjoy the conversation. And anybody who doesn't like that, they should hang up and go away right now before we get started. Okay, go right ahead.
Well, I think, started to talk about the city and the county and the differences. And I appreciate the chance to clarify, because you can imagine in the course of my day, I get held accountable for everything. And that's fine. Buck stops with me. I sought this job, and even on its worst day, I love this job. That said, it can be difficult, like for a lot of your listeners and viewers, to see stuff that you want to effectuate but aren't within your command. And that is probably most clearly expressed by our homelessness crisis. And that's where maybe we just draw the line. When folks see people who are suffering unsheltered on our streets, often what they observe are people who are deep in mental illness or people who are deep in substance use disorder. And they say, well, why isn't the mayor doing something about that? And I can do something about that. But I will tell you, the instruments I have are very blunt instruments. They're the sanitation department and the police department. And what you're observing is not someone who is garbage or someone who is necessarily doing something criminal. What you're seeing is someone who's having a mental health crisis, behavioral health crisis. And that is the jurisdiction and province of the county government. We don't have a social services department at the city of San Diego. We don't have a health and human services agency. We don't employ social workers. All of those folks and classifications, work, expertise resides at the county. And so in my State of the City address earlier this year, back in January, I tried to point that out, not because I'm trying to shift blame. We all own this problem. These are our brothers and sisters, our family members, right, who are on the streets. But it is to say that if you want to see more mental health support, asking the city for that is probably not the most effective way to get that job done. And it is actually going to our county representatives and asking them, how are you engaging on this issue? And this can go on. We could talk about the other ways that the county has jurisdiction, but that's primarily where it comes from. Mayor, why aren't you doing something about that man who's on the street corner, who's screaming at the top of his lungs and talking to people who aren't there? Well, what you described is not illegal, right? It's a free country and freedom of speech, all that stuff. What you're describing is someone who's in a deep healthcare crisis. unfortunately, we live in a country where that is generally kind of left to individual responsibilities. But for those who don't, it typically is served by the county, state, and federal government, explicitly not the city, even though they'll often call my office asking
So
for
we
something
should
done
make
about it.
another point clear to people too as you're speaking, because in some cities, like in Lemon Grove, for instance, you have the sheriff's department. And what a lot of people don't understand is that the city of San Diego is a charter city. The county of San Diego is a charter county, which means that both are sovereign. So those cities that are not charter cities come under the general purpose provisions of the state constitution and the law, and the county has more authority. And so that's why they contract for services. But in this case, as you're dealing with homelessness, it takes the power of that intergovernmental agreement between the city and the county. And I think the money comes primarily to the county, right?
Oh, no question.
Yes.
Particularly for this. I mean, they explicitly get money for this purpose of dealing with extreme mental health and addiction issues. In fact, your listeners may remember a number of years ago, they went to the ballot and voted to excise an additional tax on millionaires in California explicitly for mental health. It's the Mental Health Services Act, 1% tax on millionaires. It generates billions of dollars. And counties, not just our county here in San Diego, but counties across the state, in my judgment, and more importantly, the state auditor's judgment, are hoarding these dollars, not spending them. And so that means hundreds of millions of dollars sitting in 58 counties across the state for the purpose of serving people with severe mental illness in the middle of a mental health crisis.
And not being spent.
Correct.
And a few years ago, the county of San Diego returned some $3 million that it didn't use for behavioral health because it didn't make use of those dollars.
That is correct. In that particular instance, this was a grant to the county to stand up a shelter on what at the time was going to be Spring Valley. And they could not come to consensus. There was a lot of community opposition to a shelter. That is common. That when you
Right.
propose a shelter, I can tell you from experience, you will get opposition. And just to take this opportunity, I promise you, for every one of those I've been able to see through to opening day and cut the ribbon and open, I understand the community's concerns on the front end, but at the back end, when there are a few people encamped in that area, when they're actually being served indoors and getting graduated out into permanent housing, the community's better off. So there's some temporary pain, but for long-term gain. In this case of this situation, the county was not able to stand up that shelter and had to return that resource to the state of California. And that's a missed
Right.
opportunity because, Dr. Warren, I think you well know, we have roughly 10,000 unsheltered individuals in this county. They are present in all 18 cities and in the unincorporated areas of this county. And until that number is zero, we have needs, right? We need the resources. And if Sacramento is going to send us money, we should use every nickel of it, not return it. And in what happened in this case, those dollars were returned to Sacramento and then were sent to San Jose where they were put to use.
Right.
Those are our tax dollars, and we should keep them here local.
Okay. Any question, comment from anyone?
Oh, I was just going to say, I think some of that is a communication issue to make sure that the citizens understand the process and understand what happened, in terms of, having some type of outreach that lets people know and really understand. Is that I think saves a lot of energy because people know where to direct their questions and where to go to get their issues and concerns heard.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, there has been media coverage of this,
Yeah.
but this tends to be something that doesn't get quite the attention at the top of the
Yeah.
5 o'clock. And importantly, we have to have a working relationship with our county partners. We have some great county supervisors that I enjoy working with, but we have to have more partnership. I will tell you that in my time as mayor, 2 of our shelters are partnerships with the county, and I deeply appreciate them. One is at the Rosecrans facility, the mental health hospital that's there. If you go by there, there's a large tent in the back parking lot, has about 150 unhoused individuals that have been residing there for about 3 years now. And then further down the street on Sports Arena Boulevard, the old Pier 1, if you ever shop there.
Yeah, right.
Believe it or not, the city actually owns that building. Pier 1 went out of business. We had a vacant 30,000 square foot facility. That's unacceptable. I became mayor. We put it into use and we turned it into a homeless shelter with the partnership with the county. So we do partner in certain areas, but I'll tell you, we have dozens of homeless shelters. We have more coming online, and it's not always with the partnership of the county. And probably more important than anything, I will do what I do because my faith does not allow me to look at people suffering in the streets and do nothing. I will take action. But what I know for sure is that, as I mentioned before, there are 18 cities in this county. I believe 5 of us have shelters. The remainder don't do anything.
Wow.
And it's not just the county. It is other mayors across this county who have homeless populations, but because they don't provide any sheltering or affordable housing, what they're saying is you go on down to San Diego and let those taxpayers pay for you because we're not willing to make space for you here. So to your point about education, I appreciate this platform to educate your listeners about the county, but it's also about other cities who have been, frankly, getting a free ride for a long time off the taxpayers of this city. And I'm continually using the platform that the voters of this city have given me to try and draw attention to this. You see cities like Chula Vista and Vista that are now starting to get in this game, and that's great. But we need all of them to get into this game if we're going to truly take that 10,000 number, which again is county-wide, and bring it down to what it ought to be, which is 0. A reminder that roughly half that population is in the city of San Diego, so roughly 5,000 to 6,000. The remainder are in those other cities. But if those other cities don't have shelters, where do they go?
Right.
Mr. Mayor, I want to raise a question here because we've been dealing with this with our staff for some time, and I'm not going to take a lot of time with it, but in San Diego, I believe very much that the issue is not affordable housing, but available. And we've tried for a long time from the permit department to get permits in terms of how much has actually been built or permitted to be built, and so that we can know how many of those units are condos, how many of them are mixed use. And we know what happened down 16th Street. The Housing Commission stepped in when they tried to put some people in those 2 high rises, but give them keys only to the back door.
Oh, I know what you're talking about, yes.
You know,
Yes.
to come in from that end. And so we got all these vacant buildings downtown. And I don't hear discussion. Are they all condos? I know developers, and if they're apartment buildings, the rents are not affordable. And so we need to address how do we get people in? Because there are families on the street that could afford, but it costs an average of at least $5,000 just to move, and the security deposits and the whole bit. So has there been a discussion with Housing Commission with this?
Well, thank you for bringing that up. As you may know, this is the issue that's animated my career. That's what I've spent my entire time. My first public official job, if you will, was as a housing commissioner many, many years ago. And I'd like to tell people, including Dr. Thompson, I'll pick up your garbage once a week in exchange for the opportunity to work on housing issues. This is what I'm passionate about. So I can give you a couple numbers. And just go with me on this for a second. I'm native San Diegan, born and raised here, born in 1978. In 1978, we were a city of 700,000 people.
Okay.
At that time, we were permitting, because your phrasing is right, we were permitting 15,000 new homes per year. Fast forward to today, we are a city of 1.4 million people. So we've literally doubled our population. But in recent history, we've been permitting less than 5,000 new homes per year. So when you double your population, but reduce your housing production by 2/3, that is a perfect recipe for a housing affordability crisis and a homelessness crisis like what we're observing today. And so how do we change that? I thought you were exactly on the right track. We have to build more housing, and importantly, housing that is attainable to everyday San Diegans, working and middle class folks. What you're seeing get built, I will tell you the policies that my administration in concert with the city council have put in place are working. In 2023, we permitted nearly 10,000 new homes in the city. Last year, against the countervailing winds of inflation and high interest rates, et cetera, we still permitted about 8,700 new homes in the city. So not what we need to be doing, but certainly far more than what we've been doing in recent history. And what you're seeing is a flattening of rents, and in some areas of our city, a reduction in rent. You asked a question a moment ago. The vast majority of that is multifamily, and almost all of it is rental, not for sale. So the policy reforms that we've put in place so far, I think, are moving the market where they need to go. A reminder that in our city, we have an inclusionary housing law. So 10% of any development needs to be affordable, deed restricted, affordable. Where we have not seen success yet is in building more middle income housing and in building more for sale housing. And as I teased in our State of the City address back in January, my intention this year is to bring before the City Council some policy reforms that I believe will try and address that part of the market. And until we have that done, we will not have a fully functioning housing economy, and you'll continue to see families struggling. And exactly as you said, the high costs are not just in the monthly rent, but in the get in the door price of
Yeah.
the first and the last and the credit check and the application fee, which, by the way, Sacramento is helping us out with the leadership of Assemblymember Chris Ward, who is helping to pass legislation that says you can't charge for this, you can't charge for that. Try and give some renters a fighting chance to get in the door, even when they're competing with everybody. That the cost for entry is not as high as it currently is.
Well, we're going to come back at another time and really get into rent control, which is a factor, and even the tenants protection ordinance with some of the weak loops in that. I remember one man coming to testify about how whenever they get a new tenant, he greets them with a bottle of wine and a bag of fruit or something ridiculous. And I said, tell them about how you raise the rents and pay for that later. But
Those costs do get passed on. You're right.
One of the things that we've had discussions about is simply so much building is going on, and the value of rentals are so high. Are all of the spaces that are being built really truly being occupied? Are owners holding on to a lot of the property as a cash cow? We were asking for, I think, the housing authorities to say, can we find out what is available versus what is actually occupied?
Right.
Because availability is much different than occupied. So we have a lot of spaces, but we don't even know if they're really occupied.
That's a great question. I think what you're getting to is a concept that the council and the housing commission talked about a few years back around a vacancy tax. Really incentivizing landlords to actually put these units on the market and put them out to rent. Now, when you talk to the landlords, they make the point, this is a business and we want to make money, so we're not holding back product. But you're talking about in downtown, and I live downtown, when you look at those high rises at night, they're not lit up,
No.
right? And I think what we're talking about, to be very specific, is foreign direct investment, people who have these, well, I shouldn't say foreign, just investment properties. It could be someone who lives in Phoenix who has a summer place here when they want to get out of the heat, or really anywhere in the country, or people who want to make a safe investment if you're from abroad and you want to buy here. And, we're a free country. We allow people to have property rights, private property rights and whatnot. But in a constrained environment like what we're in, where we just simply haven't been building enough, when the price gets so high that the folks who really are able to compete in that are not people like anyone at this table, but instead people who can have a second or third home, not their first home, that's a problem. So I think generally speaking, if you're trying to be in the market for rental, that is a market that is functioning, at least they're catering to San Diegans, with the exception of Airbnbs, which is a factor, but is a fairly nominal part of our overall housing inventory. I think where the real problem is that for sale product, those condos, particularly from some of those high rises, that's a marked difference. When it's
Right.
rental, they tend to be lit up at night. When they're condos, they're not. And I think all of us, particularly for someone like myself, I'm a renter, right? I even you all pay me a very nice salary, but it is very hard to put down a down payment, no matter how much you make in this town, right?
Yeah.
And point is this: when I see those, and I think, well, I would love to be able to invest in my own hometown, place where was born and I'm gonna die.
Right.
But I can't compete against all cash offers from institutional investors who will always be able to get ahead of me and all of the other listeners who are feeling frustrated. And I want to be very clear. As your mayor, my goal is this. I want to build more housing to create a more functional housing economy that works for working and middle-class people, that is good for renters and for buyers. Because right now, what I see is that it's very hard for renters. They struggle. But probably in addition to that challenge is that people just don't think they can buy a home anymore. And that is not good for our city if people don't feel like they can be long-term participants in this community, where they have an eye on the door all the time because they don't know how much longer they can afford to live here until they give up and move somewhere else. That is not good. And just a reminder, I'm a son of a maid and a gardener. My parents were able to buy a home in this city as blue-collar workers just 2 generations ago. But I and my brother, both of us are the first in our family to go to college. Neither of us are homeowners. We've done everything right. We got the education. We got good jobs. We're doing our thing. But the bar has been set too high. And that's not about personal feelings. My brother, who's a good man, he's got a good job. He's got great kids. He's a soccer coach on the weekends. He's doing absolutely everything we'd want someone in our city to do. But he was born too late to be able to get in on a $100,000 single family house somewhere in the city. Those homes now are $1 million. And on his salary, that's not going to happen. I will do whatever it takes to keep my brother's family here. But I know a lot of folks, the only option they see is a U-Haul out of town. And I want to be the mayor that stops that builds the kind of housing that makes people like my brother, working class people who make this city work, feel like there's a future for themselves here.
Well, we're going to move on to the budget because that's such a big issue. But I will say, I believe it's 46 or 49% of the county residents are renters. And I contend that if they were voters, it might make a difference. But, we can't make them voters, so we're just going to have to wait. But we'll move on the budget because that affects all of us in terms of what's going to happen with it. Hard decisions are being made, and there are things that need to be protected. I'm so glad for a change that we're talking about people and not about the seals as a priority in the budget, okay? Because, I've sat through these meetings where the first priority was the seals. We got to do something about Seal Beach. If people get anything, they're just collateral beneficiaries. So maybe you can say a word about the budget priorities.
Well, Dr. Roy, amen to that. Your listeners may know I served on the city council for 8 years. The longest city council hearing I ever sat through was for the La Jolla Seals.
Yes.
And that says something because I've sat through hearings on the budget, on housing development, homelessness solutions, and I get it. My mom's one of those people, by the way. She loves the Seals. I get it. But, in terms of ranking of priority, I think we should all know, what the priorities are. So, yes, we are facing a significant budget challenge this year. The city's budget is over $5 billion. That's what we spend to run the city each year. And we're projecting a $258 million budget deficit. Our general fund, that $5 billion total spend, our general fund's about $2 billion. So that $258 million is over 10% of our overall spend. So this is problematic because, again, $5 billion total, that $3 billion is off book. We can't really touch that. That's the water rates. That's the sewer rates. That's over here. So the general fund, which pays for things like our police department, our fire department, our libraries, parks, recreation centers, et cetera, that's in the $2 billion. And the $258 million solution has to come out of that bucket of money. So what are we doing? Well, I think it's first important just to tell your listeners what my priorities are as the guy who has to draft the budget. And I have 4. One, we have to keep ourselves safe. Right, the first responsibility of government is the safety of the people and the property in the city, and so that's making sure that our police department, our fire department, and our lifeguards and paramedics are there when you need them. Second, we have to reduce homelessness. And why is that a budget priority? Because the fact of the matter is, leaving folks unsheltered is actually more expensive to taxpayers than it is to shelter them. They utilize our hospitals, our paramedics, the police department, the sanitation department's constantly out there cleaning. It's very, very expensive. So even in this austere year, I do believe we will add somewhere in the order of about 500 additional shelter beds in our city this year, and I can talk to you more about how I think I can get that done. The 2 remaining priorities, build more housing, because again, that's what most people, this cost of living crisis that we're living in, the number one consumer of a family budget is the rent or the mortgage, right? And so the city has a permitting department. You were talking about permits a moment ago. If we're processing permits, it's going to give you more of a fighting chance to actually get something you can afford. So there's that. And last, fix the damn roads. Right, I hear it all over our city. A lot of folks will tell me whatever neighborhood they're in is the worst streets in the city. My experience has been the worst street is the one you live on. But we have, in the first 4 years I was mayor, paved about 25% of our road network. That means about 75% of the road network needs some TLC. And by the way, when I say fix the damn roads, I kind of have that as a catch-all for infrastructure, because I also would throw stormwater in there. You may know, all of you may know, you're close watchers of city work, our biggest unfunded infrastructure asset class is stormwater. Actually is in the roads, and the roads are not great, so you understand how bad the stormwater system is. So knowing those are the 4 priorities: keep us safe, build more homes, reduce homelessness, fix the roads, that's what I'm focused on, right? We have to propose a budget at the end of next week, April 15th. I want to be clear with your listeners, that is a preliminary draft budget. It is developed with my department directors and myself without the benefit of council or public input. But I do want to give you all something to react to, because when you just allow people to talk, they'll bring up everything and we'll never get anything done. So we'll publish that, and then the public and the council have a month to respond to it. And May 14th is when I propose what is really the budget, and then we'll have another month of debate. The council is scheduled to adopt the final budget on June 10th.
Well, let me ask you this. Have you all considered zero-based budgeting?
Yes.
And how is that? Because people say they have, but then they still hold back and they want to And so that seems to wipe out anything that was just being held on to. Then we go forward. So how is that working?
Well, it's working in the sense that because of the size of our deficit, I've asked everyone to completely rethink how they do their budgets. Now, we have some directors that have been around a very long time. We have some directors that are just brand new. So it presents an interesting spectrum of respondents. For the folks who are like, I've seen budget deficits before, I know how to deal with this,
Right.
to the ones that are fresh and new. Your listeners may have heard something about this, but back in December, when it became clear that Measure E was not adopted by the voters by a very slim margin, that we were going to have to make these reductions, I directed departments to provide me with 20% reductions to their. What does it look
Right.
like? What does 20% reduction look to you? Now, I want to be clear. 20% from every department is more than $258 million. But what it does, kind of to your point of giving me choices, how would you choose to do this when you're picking and choosing amongst things? Because zero-based budgeting is, I think, an effective tool. I think the challenge with it is that so much of what we have to do is compulsory. We have a legal responsibility to pick up the phone when you call 911 and get someone to your door. We have a legal responsibility to pick up the garbage every week. Like, there's things that just are not fungible. And when you look at what is left, it's a very small band of what's left. And that's how the libraries and the parks always seem to be on the chopping block, because that is elective compared to what we're legally required to provide. That said, that exercise was very helpful in helping me see what is out there that we can make reductions to. You may know that we are doing a full effort on this because it's not just what we can cut, but what can we recoup in terms of revenue. We have not been charging full cost recovery on our permits for a very long time. That means that developers and other folks who seek permits from the city are not paying the true costs of that permit. And as a consequence, we as the taxpayers make up that difference. Well, I think those folks should pay their own way, and so we've adjusted the fees.
Well, do you have, and I don't want to hog this with questions, but most people don't usually understand that there's a distinction between your operating budget and your capital improvements budget. And so the capital improvements is the one we do on the infrastructure in the streets. And at the same time that we're doing that, when we go into places like Encanto, which still look like, the rural East County in so many places, how is the capital improvement budget coming out in this adjustment?
Well, I know I'm talking to a PhD when you're asking that question. But I'm glad that you asked, because I've made very clear that it is my intention to resolve the structural budget deficit this year. We are just not situated. We always spend more than we take in part because we have not been willing to do the tough things like adjust user fees, charge for trash collection, et cetera, et cetera. That said, that does not include the capital budget. And the reason for that is that number is just massive. We studied it a couple years ago, looked at all of our asset classes, and came up with a number of roughly $9 billion in needs. So needs. So think about in your own community, whatever road you're like, oh my God, they should have paved that ages ago. That would be in that $9 billion number. Then think about the rec center that's fallen apart. That would be in there. The drains and the pipes that you can't see, that would be in there. List goes on. All the stuff that we've never built that need to. Maybe that lot that says, library coming soon, that's been there and the signs faded. That would be in there. Problem is this. Inflation is real. It doesn't just impact your listener's own household budget. It affects the city. In fact, I would tell you the $258 million problem that we're dealing with is in part about inflation. Give you an example. All of us probably are frustrated by the cost of gas, right? How much it costs per gallon. We know it. We're very sensitive to it. You and your own families have had to make choices to accommodate that increase. You probably do that for 1 or 2 vehicles. The city of San Diego has 5,000 vehicles. And so those increases at the pump, we don't get gas for free. We have to buy it too. And that's also true for our energy bill, et cetera, et cetera. So we are dealing with that. But as we solve the structural issue, it does not address the capital issue. We will still spend about $1 billion this year and next year on capital. But when you look at the totality of the need, and I told you a couple years ago it was $9 billion, due to inflation, it is now over $11 billion. So this problem is enormous, and there's no way that we can reasonably tackle it without new revenue sources, which is why we sought the sales tax increase in the last election, and we lost by about 1,700 votes out of over 600,000 cats.
Please
Can I have
go.
a question?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I had a question in the sense of, in prepping for, and this in the gas, does the city have their own gas stations, or do they buy gas in bulk so that they get better prices? How do we look at how we lower the cost of the the cost of things in the city?
We do, and that gets back to Dr. Warren's question about zero-based budgeting, just trying to be more efficient, right? So we do purchase our own gas in bulk. You've probably seen them if you've gone by a police station. There's some pumps in the back. Same is true for firehouses. Our fleet services is run by our great director, Mashira Little. They have stations, 20th and B, Choias, Rose Canyon. Those are where vehicles gas up. You can buy in bulk, and that helps. But still, when the cost is going up, it goes up. And so even if you're buying in bulk, it's still an increment higher.
Well, the reason why I ask that is because a lot of times people, when they hear gas, I always try to tell people that it's not the same as what we're paying, but it's still higher.
Absolutely.
Every time it goes up. My second question is taken from some of the comments. What happens when you have a major department that seems to be going through some issues? How do you all address those issues to make sure that they're heard and rectified? Because I've been hearing in certain departments that there are major issues that seem to never be addressed.
Well, it's a tough one without knowing the specific department, but I could say on a macro level, Dr. Warren mentioned at the beginning about strong mayor. We used to have a city manager who that was their responsibility. Mm-hmm. He is now me. And that was the voters did that back in 2004. We've had now a 21-year experience with it, but I agree with Dr. Warren. I don't think the general public understands that. To your question, those department directors are directly accountable to me. And we try to address them. Things come up all the time. It's a big city. 12,000 employees. We have nearly 30 different departments. And so there's always something going on. That's why it's like kind of depends on the situation. But I'll give you maybe a recent example where we have it's hard to get vehicles now. Mm-hmm. It's, the supply chain issues from COVID continue to be a thing, particularly when we talk about some of the very specialized vehicles that we use. It isn't all, compact sedans. It's a lot of heavy duty equipment. That's hard to get. It takes about 3 years now to actually get a fire engine if you want one. And cities are all just clamoring and competing, driving the cost up, right? Mm. So as a consequence, we've been having to rent vehicles to try and fill in those gaps because we can't have staff being paid to sit around. And the work still needs to get done. So how do you make it work? Well, making sure that's a new experience for the city. And I will tell you, Dr. Thompson, I'm not happy with the way that we've been doing that. And so we had to go to the city council, explain to them that this has gotten out of control. We need to ratchet it back and start putting in safeties and control mechanisms in there to deal with it. I believe we've now successfully addressed that, but that was about 2-3 month process. So your listeners were asking, well, how do you do it? Well, you start seeing, I look at the bank statement every month. You start seeing some stuff and you're like, that's getting a little high. You start asking questions. You start studying. We have a great department at the city, the Performance and Analytics Department. They call themselves PANDA, Performance and Analytics. Mm-hmm. And they're the folks that really kind of watch this stuff. They will flag things from me. I'll bring the department director in. We'll talk about it. In the case of the rental vehicles I just described, that was multiple departments. So you bring multiple people in. And then you got to figure out what's the actual solution. What are we trying to do? Do we need these vehicles? Some of them we do. Some of them we don't. Return them right now. Get those savings going. So I don't know if that's a particularly great example, but it's a recent one that we've had to deal with. And it just goes to show you, people will holler at me about the roads or homeless, but there's 9 million things going on in the city that you have to keep an eye on. And this is where your listeners are helpful. The public flags stuff all the time, and I appreciate it. We look at our emails, we get about 1,000 a week. And you go through them and you try and find things that have meaning. I'll be honest, a lot of things are not necessarily tethered in real issues. Maybe they don't know what's going on or don't understand. That's on us to explain it. But sometimes there's some stuff there that needs working, and I appreciate when people flag things for our attention. We'll be a better organization. We might save some money in the middle of a budget crisis, and at the end of the day, we end up serving the city better. So
it seems like you're really trying to be efficient and cost-saving measures and all of that. But I think our listeners also want to know, with your budget and any cuts that you're going to be making, how is that going to, hopefully, how are you going to make sure that doesn't disproportionately affect communities south of the 8?
Yeah.
Because that's a big complaint.
No question. And I lived here my whole life. I understand the historical disparities that communities like ours have experienced. And as a mayor, I'm trying to do everything I can to change it. Now, I want to be really explicit, particularly right now, as your mayor, in a national environment where people increasingly seemingly think that diversity, equity, inclusion are bad words. I do not agree with that. And we will not be stepping backward on our commitment to making sure that we address historic injustices within our organization. In fact, this will be the first year that we have tactical equity plans in our budget. We have weaved equity in for the last couple of years, but that's been nice at the maybe 10,000 foot level. What we're trying to do is get to a much more granular level. So you can say, well, what's the disparity in the library department look like? Well, that probably looks like internet access differences, right?
Exactly.
But you
And-
did something very special with that because in adjusting the budget crisis, you folded DEI into HR.
Correct. Our race and equity office, one of their primary function is training staff to
Right.
do this work because it shouldn't be owned by a handful of staff members who are responsible for diversity, equity, inclusion. If we're doing this correctly, all 12,000 employees understand what those terms are, what it means, and how that plays out in real life. And so they need to continue that work as members now of the HR department to make sure that we are continually training our staff so that whether you're an engineer in our capital projects department or a park ranger, you understand what piece of the equity pie you have to deal with and how you're going to make it better. Back to your question, what I think people don't know, and I understand that they don't, is a couple of years ago, the city council with me worked together to put equity into not just our budget, but into much of the work that we do. So Dr. Moore, when you were saying a moment ago about how Encanto kind of looks the same
Right.
as it has always looked,
Right.
let me explain very quickly for your listeners. Historically, most of the money for capital improvements came from developer fees. And the city's policy at the time was to keep those fees generated in the neighborhoods where those projects were constructed. And it makes some sense on the high level, right? You're building a new dense housing development. They have to pay a firehouse fee or a library
Right.
fee. Well, then let's go ahead and keep that money in that neighborhood. But here's the problem. What we have are accounts for certain neighborhoods that literally have millions and millions of dollars in them with no identified projects. Meanwhile, we have some of our older communities that have been underinvested in for over a century
no
with no
dollars.
money in it.
Right.
So what we did a couple of years ago was collapse those 50 separate different funds into one fund. And so now we can choose as elected leaders, you all have elected us to make decisions, to choose where is that money most needed? Where are the gaps and disparities most evident, and then invest in accordingly. It is not coincidence that last Friday I dedicated the JFK Park in Lincoln Park after a $5 million renovation, and later that same morning went over to Memorial Park in Logan Heights to dedicate a new senior center there. That funding flexibility that we've now built into the budget allows us to invest in communities the way that we couldn't previously. So even with reduced resources, that flexibility and the fact that we consider equity in everything that we do now, I think means that we'll at least be able to give a fair shot, and certainly the questions will be asked. Now, that was a long preamble to the cuts that we're anticipating. There is no way to balance this budget as we're required to do. We're not like the federal government where they're allowed to run a deficit. We must, by law, balance the budget. You can't cut over 10% of your budget out without making some level of reductions. I've already shared with you, priorities are keeping folks safe, build more housing, house the homeless, and fix the roads. There will be reductions really to every department. They'll have to do something. But I'll give you an example. You talk about efficiency. We have a great fire chief, Rob Logan. I was very proud to appoint him. I'm glad he was supported by the council on a unanimous vote. Chief Logan, probably not too happy about this, but he's a good team player and he's a good fire chief. His office is in rented private space in downtown San Diego in a Class A office building. That lease is coming due later this year. I'm canceling that lease. We will not be renewing that. That will save the city about $8 million. Chief Logan will be moving in with me over at the Civic Center complex.
All right.
It's not a Class A office space, but he's not a fancy guy. He just wants to serve the communities. That savings will help us bridge that gap. Moving into an owned city building means there's no rent, right? So that problem is solved. That's the kind of reductions I'm hoping to make, ones that the public won't see or experience, but will allow us to continue to make sure that the fire station in their neighborhood stays open.
And I'm so glad you raised that point because I've got two big bones here to pick.
Ooh, let's go.
Ever since I've been in the city, some 40 years, with the Voice and Viewpoint, I have never had the San Diego Fire Department do one recruitment effort with the Voice and Viewpoint. Not one. And that is very significant because fire departments represent old guard family places. That's why when 9/11 took place, there were so many families decimated because the uncle, the brother, the cousin, everybody was in the department. And through all the fire chiefs, I appreciate we've had fire chiefs of color. That's wonderful. But at the same time, and I've talked to Logan about this, there is no recruitment effort being made other than when we go to a church, we tell people we have some vacancies. That's not meeting the requirements of law, notice and due process. The police department, I've talked to Chief Wall about the same thing. You got new classes starting. They still do not. They spend all this money on PR campaigns, video, and yet we're in a city where during the pandemic, we had close to 50% of our people who were not on the internet. And so it's not sufficient to put a vacancy up on the city's website and say, well, y'all supposed to go see it. And I am getting real tired of beating this horse and having people think this is not about special treatment for us. It's about community papers have become an integral part of San Diego because of the diversity of the population now. And so it's no longer sufficient to just put something in the transcript, which used to be the place when people had to go there to look at the architectural blueprints and all the stuff they can see online now. They don't even distribute outside of the building. And yet the city is still pumping their business over there to them. When they did the charter, the UT put a handwritten provision in the charter. I won't say the UT, let's say the city put a handwritten provision in the charter that said the notices could only go to newspapers of daily general circulation. And Jack McGorry, when he was city manager, he was so concerned about that he created a special budget for community inclusion in terms of papers. And so if we hire any, and I know there's a hiring freeze, but we're short of police officers, we get concerned about the fire department, then somewhere there has got to be a movement from people just assuming that they know what's best because they know somebody at this church and we going to that church. And what I do, and I'm going to make this point real brief, is when you see jobs listed, they have equal employment, equal opportunity employer. And so what happens is when federal dollars come, if those dollars are not advertised according to Title V, which is the Administrative Procedures Act under the federal statutes, then due process hasn't been met. And under Title V, Sections 553, 54, and 55, it's very specific. That's where we have the register, the Federal Register come in, where people have a chance to react. So it's not about how many people you count that see it as much as it is about making it available to be seen. And these are places that we stay very weak in. Even before you came, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the Civil Service Commission, they were all putting out these weak reports. You remember years ago when they did these $400,000 studies about equity, and when the Association of General Contractors had 99% of the contracts, but they wanted 100, and so they fought. You've seen all of this from the days you were there. So these things have not really gone away for us, and they need to resurface. And some of it is difficult because we have a city council that doesn't remember much of what you and I are talking about. When you say you were born in '78, that was the year that the San Diego Police Department had to go into a consent agreement with the Justice Department because of how they were treating people here. And so we've come through a lot of time, but we don't want to repeat that time. Yeah. And so we want to keep it kind of in front of you because if nobody mentions it, you'll miss it. Yeah. And it's kind of key. So I'm through on that horse. I'm sorry.
No.
It's important. It's important to bring up.
Well, there was a reason I studied history at the University of San Diego.
It was your favorite,
it repeats itself,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And Dr. Warren, you bring up something. The challenge with term limits is that the constant turnover of leadership means
Yeah.
that people look at issues from about an 8-year horizon, and sometimes just 4, right? Mm-hmm. And that most of the issues we're talking about are measured in decades, if not longer, right? And but what I would say is that the work that I do at City Hall is always informed by my grandparents who came from all around the world, Philippines, Puerto Rico, a Native American reservation in Alaska, in Oklahoma. And I think about my grandfather who came here because of his military service, and in my life, I never saw him in anything other than a three-piece suit, to include mowing the lawn of his house in Claremont. And as a kid, I just thought it was sort of weird. Like, why is my grandpa mowing the lawn in a suit? It's odd, right? As an adult, I understand that a man of color who showed up in this town in the 1940s and had to raise a family in Claremont in the 50s and 60s was not accorded equality under the law. Right?
No.
And that suit was the only way that he saw that he could communicate that he was a man worthy of respect. That was only 2 generations ago. He always freely shared that the home that he and my grandmother bought in Claremont, that they had to pay more than anyone else on that block because they were the only family of color on that block. But they wanted to be there because they knew the education was going to be better in that community, and they wanted that for their kids. I'm grateful for his sacrifices. I'm sorry that for the experience that he had, and I recognize that I get to have this job because he was willing to put up with whatever they threw at him, which was some pretty tough stuff, in order to give me the chance to be here. So that history stuff is important, and I don't forget it, and I hope that all of us can remind everyone. At Leon Williams' going home ceremony the other day, I mean, I like some of those stories about the history because it wasn't that long ago.
Yeah.
And there's always the risk, particularly in America today, of going backwards. And we cannot allow ourselves to do that. We've all fought too hard to get a seat at the table. And once we have that seat, we should all share in those benefits. And Ellie asked, how are we going to do things differently with capital improvement, with noticing of employment opportunities?
Yeah, one of the things that just to follow up with that is how do we keep more of the city business, especially when it comes down to consultancies in San Diego? One of the things is that people who do PR, a lot of the PR people are from outside of San Diego, and so they don't have the real snapshot. So they go to the things that they know or that are the biggest. How do we then require in these contracts that not only do they use San Diego resources, but beyond just what they can see, but actually do real research to make sure that they're actually involved in all of the community and not just what they can find or what they know?
I love that question because it sounds like it's a simple one on its face, and then you get in the innards of it, it becomes hard. What does that mean? We do have a small local business preference. We have a local hire. We have various things that sort of incentivize that, but we also have protections to make sure that I'm not hiring my brother-in-law to do these contracts, right? And so these sort of, it's got to be blind, but we want to make sure that these protections are in place for local, et cetera, et cetera. And as you were saying a moment ago, Dr. Warren, we study this stuff all the time, and we always seem to fall short. And I think that's why, right? And let me also throw on top Ward Connerly and the race blind sort of thing that we have to do, so we can't even necessarily measure some of this stuff. So I'll get folks who come up to me and they're real hot, and I understand why. But they may or may not know. They may even voted for something that's making this problem hard, right?
Right.
Let alone, or maybe didn't vote, to your point a moment ago, or they didn't show up. This is not trying to excuse my way out of the situation. As I mentioned a moment ago, we're going to spend $1 billion, even in a budget crisis, on capital improvements in neighborhoods all across the city. And we do want to see more of that work stay local. This is part of why the city council adopted a project labor agreement, so that we do have one means of making sure that the hiring halls for this are held in Canto and in Mountain View and in Claremont and Linda Vista, to hopefully get San Diegans to do this $1 billion worth of work. Some of those other kinds of contracts, the consultant, the outreach, that becomes a little bit harder. A lot of those folks that bid, even the outsiders know they got to find a local or two that have some sort of beat knowledge, if you will, of neighborhoods. But how that always plays out, one of the things I hear from folks is, I'm a sub, I get invited to be a part of this team on the front end. They get the contract and then they say adios. And I do believe that does happen. And when we try and perfect that, people are wily. They will always try and work around. Back to the conversations of how do you hold people accountable at departments or zero-based budgeting? Like, if it isn't working, who's asking for the fresh reconsideration? This is one of the challenges and why we have to solve the structural budget issue this year, because when we're constantly just looking about what we're going to cut, we're never talking about how we can start at adding, right? How do you add in the oversight, the protections, that kind of stuff? Because right now we're saying, how do we just keep people on the job? Like, how do we make sure that we actually still pave another couple hundred miles of roads next year? Or are we just going to give up on that? So we need to get to a place where our foundation is strong enough to start having those more evolved and deeper conversations than simply issuing the contract, but making sure the contract actually does the actual benefit of sourcing from San Diego. Because guess what? If they source from San Diego, they pay San Diego sales tax, and that comes back to us. This is the kind of stuff that we need to put this behind us in terms of our budget issues, so that we can actually do the work of having greater impact.
Well, that's where we have to do an education, because you will recall at one point when we got real concerned about contracting, We started breaking the contracts into smaller amounts. Then the problem was getting a bond.
Yes.
Okay, and so then we started trying to come up with smaller bond issues. I know the school district even brought it down so that they had a one-day fair where they were able to give contracts that came right under the window of the amount for bonds being bonded. And so we didn't have the insurance companies and the people didn't have the history. And so we've lost a lot of that. And I think because of the internet, because of how we just kind of dump stuff over into one place. So I think we will have to have some groups go back and review some of those things in terms of how they've been done. Now, I got one real key question here. You mentioned, we talk about the capital improvements budget and the operating budget. Just for the record, the reason so many cities got into difficulty with infrastructure is because they were invading at one point the capital improvement budget to balance the operating budget. And I'm wondering, has anyone ever tried to bring that up here? Because some people are concerned about the amount of money, but their streets have already been fixed. Okay, and so, and I mean, when you talk about the budget the size that it is, you could very easily reach into it and take something and balance. So how has that worked? Is the independent budget analyst mentioned it, or have you been pushed on that?
I mentioned it. Well, so this is a very relatable situation. When times are tough, maybe your spouse loses your job or you lose your job or whatever, and you start to tighten the belt at home, what do? You don't replace the water heater. You let the roof that needs replacing go another year or two.
Right.
The city's no different. When our times are tough, we start shorting on the long-term capital improvements. That's home talk for a new roof or a new lawn or whatever the case may be. The challenge for us is we've been doing that for a generation or two now. So here's why this is getting at a sort of critical point for our city. San Diego grew in two very large spurts. In 1915, we hosted a World's Fair that gave us Balboa Park and brought the military here, and then we were off to the races, right? And then after World War II in the 50s and 60s in the defense industry and other stuff, again, huge amounts of growth in our city. What does that mean? That means that the dams and the roads and the sidewalks were built 150 years ago, right? Which are generally the lifespan for those things. Every one of our dams are 100 years old or older. We've got our money's worth out of them. They're now at the end of their useful life. Same is true for maybe a sidewalk, end of its useful life. We just happen to be the San Diegans that showed up at the time when these bills are coming due, and previous San Diegans, other leaders, mayors, et cetera, have been putting off replacing that roof.
Right.
But that was fine for year 1, 2. When it's decade 3, 4, or 5, think about City Hall. We have our original roof on our City Hall from 1965. It is still run with the same HVAC system from 1965, which is to say not energy efficient. But when looking at, do I replace the HVAC or the roof at City Hall, or do I keep the library open a few more hours for the kids, or do I keep the pools open so the kids are occupied in the summertime? We've always chosen to do that. That is taking from the capital budget to put it in the operating budget. I think generally people would agree with that, but we've been kicking the can so long down the road that the road now is full of potholes, and everyone's saying, Mayor, fix the roads. Well, we're trying to do that.
Okay.
So one of the things I want to ask, even with the air conditioning piece would be, but if we do replace the air conditioning, wouldn't it make it more efficient? We'll save money,
Yeah.
things of that nature. Here's the question I have, because I saw this on the news this morning. They said that if your car gets damaged through a pothole, they advertised that the city would help fix it or repay it. I'm like, where are we getting this money from? Because everybody's car is being damaged.
Yes.
Well, yes, I also saw that coverage, and that happens to be true. If we break it, we should buy it. This is making things right. Where does that money come? It comes from our risk management department, which is essentially our insurance. We are self-insured. So that is coming from your library money. That is coming from your fire department money. But yeah, my heart breaks when listen, when I was growing up, if we had a flat tire, that killed the whole month, right? We didn't live like we had room for that. And I know that's true today for people with flat tires, bent rims, broken axles. That happens, and it's at the city's expense. And when it is, we should make it right. But that said, this is no way to get ahead of the budget challenges. And a part of why, you heard me say, what are my 4 priorities? One of them is fix the roads. That is intentional, because if we're fixing the roads, we're going to have less claims. That is reducing costs to taxpayers, but also reducing pain on families that are trying to make ends meet during this affordability crisis of ours. So Dr. Warren, back to your point, like you can skimp on capital, but that bill is going to come due eventually, and it is coming due eventually. You have seen what has happened from underinvestment in stormwater repairs.
Oh, yes.
The OB Pier is closed currently, and it has no hope of reopening.
Right.
We have other city facilities that are just not in good repair, and I'm so sorry that my predecessors were never honest with folks to say, no, you probably need to pay for trash, or, you know what, I'm sorry, we do need to increase the parking meter rates in order to get the resources to fix this. Because right now, what we're doing is just seeing people, one after another, flattening their tires on a potholed street that should have been fixed 20 years ago. And instead, we're going to pay out to repair that tire and then just leave the street falling apart. That is not a way to run a city. And that is why, again, I was saying a moment ago, I'm insistent on us figuring out a way to structurally balance the city. I've been reelected, thank you to the voters of this city. It means I have 4 more years at the city. Let's do all the hard work this year. Let's bear down. Let's make the tough choices. Let's make the hard calls. Let's do the things that we're not really happy about so that for the next 3 years, you can draw upon my expertise and the expertise of our city council. 7 of the 9 of them are in their second terms. They've been around the block. To take that expertise, put it to work, and let's rebuild the organization thoughtfully with the right priorities. And of course, that assumes that the economy doesn't go into recession, which the news today about terrorists makes me very nervous that may be the case.
We should be.
But that said, at least I should plan for what I know today, which is that as presently constituted, we need to solve a $258 million budget problem. If we do it with ongoing reductions to match ongoing spending, then next year, we know every year we grow about $50 million because more people, whatever. Then let's pour as much of that money back into the capital plan and into needed neighborhood services.
So here's a trick question for you.
Yeah.
Now that La Jolla wants to succeed from the union, and they got enough signatures, how much revenue do we lose if they're successful with getting their cityhood?
Well, I would tell you the deadline was yesterday to supply
Right.
the signatures, and my understanding is they did not
Oh, they
supply
did?
enough.
Okay.
That's true. Okay, I'm getting the thumbs up. And so my hope is that's behind us.
Right.
It was obviously, I'm not undecided on that question. They should not leave. We are stronger together. And
Right.
by the way, we just built them a new $50 million fire station.
Of course.
So I want that money back
That's
if they were
right.
about to leave.
That's right.
But that said, I want to show some respect for really all communities. But here's the deal: La Jolla is one of the oldest neighborhoods in the city. Their roads and sidewalks are as bad as any other place in the city,
Yeah.
right? That said, now here's also the truth: when I was a kid growing up, where did we go to recreate for free? La Jolla. The beaches were free, right? The parking's free. The parks are open, right? So I think all of San Diegans care about all of our neighborhoods, right? A lot of folks from the 4th Council District work in the 1st Council District because that's where some of the jobs are. So we should concern ourselves with the state of repair that's there. That said, those same communities, this is a very expensive matter, right? To do the studies and to do the balloting and all that stuff. I mean, this is money we don't have, right? So there's that. But there's also, they are contributing. The Torrey Pines golf course that's in La Jolla is owned by the city of San Diego. It is
Yes,
owned
it
and
is.
maintained by the people, the taxpayers of this city. And that does generate significant revenue. And that is revenue, again, that we can help put back into communities. The hotels that are in that community do generate revenue that go back into the full city. So this is a symbiotic relationship, and no one neighborhood is apart. Going back to what we were discussing before, this idea of 50 separate pots for infrastructure improvements that only stay in North Park or in Scripps Ranch or in Otay Mesa. That is not how we live our lives. I live and work in downtown San Diego. I'm here with you right now in Kearny Mesa. Parts of today I was in Claremont and in Logan. You go around the city. We should all care about one another, but while acknowledging that there are historic disparities. And we can do both. I'm hopeful that we're putting this behind us, and then we can get back to the business of operating as one city whose all of our 1.4 million people, all of our fates are intertwined, and we can't act like we can just shove off and act like that nothing's going to happen. And to be very clear, I was very clear with those folks. We will get our money back for that fire station, for that golf course, for the streets, the sidewalks, the rec center, the library, all the things. So we paid for that. So I would expect full repayment.
Yep.
And then, they want to come to ours. They want to dump their garbage in our landfill. Well, we're going to pay a pretty penny. And we're going to,
charge
if you
them.
want to put your sewage through our Point Loma wastewater treatment plant, we're going to charge you a lot. So this
Right,
was never going to
right.
be a winner for them, which is why I don't think this is moving forward.
So what I'm
Okay.
hearing is fairness, right?
Fairness.
Fairness. And you have some hard decisions to make, but you're going to be making them equitably across. the city.
Absolutely. I'll give you this. This is a concept I'm sort of working on, back to those department director conversations or whatever. I recognize that we need rec centers in every city, or every neighborhood, right? They are important. Doesn't matter where you're at in the city, La Jolla, Encanto, it's important. We're gonna have to make reductions. That's just gonna happen. But what I'm trying to work with the department right now is to say, okay, let's have like a base number of hours that you just know they're going to be open in all parts of the city, but then give the neighborhood or the council member the chance to maybe make adjustments with maybe 10 of those hours. So maybe you're an older community. I think about maybe Rancho Bernardo. There's a lot of senior citizens in that community. Maybe that you take those additional hours, you put them in the morning. Or maybe you're a community, a rec center that's right next to an elementary school or a high school, and it would really be advantageous for it to be open at night. That's getting to the kind of work that I'm trying to do with the city at this point. Okay, we're a big city. There are certain baseline services, but let's curate this for where we are in the city to try and meet the needs of that unique community. That's how I see this sort of playing out going forward, that we all share in the pain of the budget reductions, but we do it in ways that match the context of the neighborhood where they're playing out.
So we are running out of time, and this has been great. I was glad to hear you mention Torrey Pines Golf Course. Because when I did Gold Coast, I had to remind them that they were a public golf course. And so we were able to use it each year. For all the years we did it, we had our golf tournaments there at Torrey Pines.
It gives me no greater pride than standing on those greens. I was there not a month ago with Tiger Woods and reminding the whole world, this is city property maintained by city workers, owned by the city taxpayers, and people often get surprised. I understand why maybe someone would forget that it's public.
And I don't play golf. I just go there to wave to them and meet them when they come back.
You and me both. Yeah, I don't play either. I haven't got time for that.
Yeah, we weren't interested. Your Honor, this has been a real great opportunity for us. I think we've had a great discussion. For everything we touched on, there were things that we didn't and couldn't just in terms of time. But I think that the public always needs this education process because in so many instances we have forgotten more than they're learning in terms of how city government works. And I think that that you're doing a great job with it. I think sometimes you're much kinder than I would be with some people, but that's just...
you got to work with everybody, right?
I know.
And what I love most, Mayor, is you are saying that we're all in it together and we need to work together. And I really appreciate that message that you're transmitting to all of us here.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. This is I serve 1.4 million people, and it's extremely difficult to get to all of them. To be an elected representative for all of them, this is an incredible, invaluable opportunity to talk with at a very key part of our city.
Well, we want you to feel free to come back here. We want you to know that all of our programs are archived so that people will be watching this program in great numbers even after tonight, ongoing, not only here, but globally, that we now have an international following. I know we have, from our paper, we got 184 countries that follow us. Wow. And then
72.
He's got 72, and we actually hear from these people because in our case, we have a social analytics person who tracks 24 hours a day what they read, what they look at, what they hear, and the whole bit. And so we're excited about it, and you'll be getting residual from this. You might be getting
Residual
calls.
Can the city make money off that?
Yeah, residual stuff.
You had me off the pass. I would be delighted to come back, particularly after our budget's introduced, to maybe explain it to your listeners. Do they understand what the trade-offs were? What's the thought behind it?
Right.
Again, we're only at the beginning of this process, right? The public review in the months of April and May. We're currently working off of really old data. We work off of basically November economic data. So we'll get new data in April. This timeline was, by the way, set by the voters in the charter, so I don't get that trick.
Okay.
But coming back to educate or help explain or take feedback from folks would be ideal. And we have a lot more work to do. Once we pass this budget, hopefully in June, it starts on July 1, there's going to be new issues to have to deal with. We're going to figure out big and challenging issues like trash collection, paid parking at the beaches, capital improvement plan. They're big issues. And to your point, we're all in this together. And I want to make sure that I at least have the opportunity to benefit from everyone's input. and then make the tough choices to move us forward. Again, the goal is simply to make sure that we're a city where everyone can feel included. I recognize everyone at this table has probably not always felt like this city was for you, and it probably still feels that way for a lot of your listeners. We can't make up for decades or centuries of challenges in one mayoral
No.
term. You're not going to be able to do it in two either. My goal is to move this as far as I possibly can with the time that I'm given, and then pass the baton to the next person to run it as far as they can. That's the relay race of history. I'm going to do my part with the time that's been given to me.
Dr. Thompson, you take us out.
That is from the desk of the editor with the Honorable Mayor Todd Gloria with us on this evening. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you all for listening. Continue to share, send your feedback into the San Diego Voice and Viewpoint, and anybody who has any questions, continue to ask them, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. Until next week, this is from the desk of the editor with Dr. John Warren, right here on GODradio1.com. Be blessed.